do that again.
Well, it was worth a shot, right?
Yes. We are recording tonight's presentation, so don't say anything you wouldn't want your mother to hear. If you have a question or a comment for us, you can enter that into the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we will be getting to your questions at the end of our program. We do anticipate using a whole 2 hours today, so please be mindful of the pacing for the program. And we are now going to get right into our program from AIA New Jersey on Equity Guide to Community Engagement. This course is approved for 2 AIA learning units. And this slide just shows the boilerplate from AIA National regarding continuing education. You will be sent a survey at the end of the program, probably tomorrow, and you need to complete and submit that survey in order to get your 2 credits. And our webinar system is also monitoring your participation. So if you sign off in 2 minutes, I think you don't get any credit.
True.
Okay. The Equity Guide to Community Engagement is a live interactive course. We encourage you to participate with us. We have 3 panelists from AIA who are going to be a part of our conversation tonight. I'll be introducing them in a few minutes. The program tonight comes from the National Guide to Community Engagement, which I'll provide the link at the end of the program, but it's a series of 9 guides developed by AIA National in response to coming up with professional strategies to increase equity in the architectural profession. Our learning objectives specifically tonight, as they relate to this topic, participants will learn how to practice greater equity and community engagement, increasing the profession's value to society, as well as its visibility among potential partners and future practitioners. Participants will learn the fundamental principles and attitudes of community engagement and specific methods for working with community members in equitable, inclusive, and just design practices, decision-making, and outcomes. Participants will learn what community engagement is and how architectural projects improve when divergent voices arrive at consensus about project goals and characteristics. And participants will learn ways that individual and group citizen architects can participate and contribute to equitable community. Our first contributor tonight is Rachel Elrich. Rachel, please introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel Ehrlich. I'm an associate principal at Datner Architects, as I guess you can see from the slide. My specialty is on the architecture of affordable housing, but Datner has a much broader practice. Datner's foundation is in civic architecture, and what we mean by that is we design for schools, libraries, transit, housing, healthcare, parks and recreation, and police and fire stations. And the design and creation of these public spaces and projects really commits us to engaging and exchanging ideas with clients and public agencies and communities. That's all I'll say for now. I guess I'll just mention that one of the reasons I am very pleased and excited to present tonight is because I ran for borough council in my town of Madison, New Jersey last year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that experience and why I think all of us architects should be inspired to engage personally with our local governments and our boards and commissions. Thanks, Stacy.
Thank you, Rachel. Next up, we have Susan Pickard-Bristol. Susan has been a speaker at some of our previous equity seminars, and I'm excited to have her back here again tonight. Susan, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you so much. It's great to be with you all. I am I guess, participating in this in a multifaceted way. And just to summarize the forms of community engagement that I've participated in over my career thus far, many of them were unexpected. Some of them were very intentional, and they all are beginning to make sense to me now after all these years. But it started with volunteering, followed by getting involved in regional planning nonprofit work, becoming a municipal volunteer, leading to chair of a planning board, then teaching, which is not actually on the agenda from this national AIA guide, but I'll talk more about that later. And then activism and community organizing. And finally, now I'm on the ballot as a candidate for borough council in a very small community, but one in which everyone eventually participates. But I think as an architect, I have some particular skills that are really relevant, especially now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. Next, we have Simone Sagonis. Simone recently participated in an AIA New Jersey webinar on citizen architects, and we're excited to have her tonight on our panel for community engagement. Simone, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Stacy. Yes, it's an honor to be here and to be with Susan and Rachel. So I'm joining them in our civic engagement. I have a solo small firm practice, which actually gives me the opportunity to extend a lot of my time to my community. I was first involved with zoning board and then planning board, and I served on our town council for 10 years. And now I'm on the ballot for Bergen County Board of Chosen Freeholders, or let's say maybe commissioner. I think the name is going to be changed to. Like Susan and Rachel, we are aspiring to get more architects on our public policy making boards, as we can offer our counties, our local communities, as well as our state, better guidance and directions through our knowledge. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And myself, I will be leading us tonight through the content that is provided by the National Guide for Engaging Communities. Sometimes I may be reading definitions or data directly from the content because my role is to provide that direct data to you, while our other panelists will be providing information from their personal experiences. I am the chairperson for the AIA New Jersey Equity Committee. I'm a past chair of the Women in Architecture Committee. I'm a past president of AIA New Jersey and the Architects League of Northern New Jersey, and I do a lot of work with the K-12 community and speaking engagements on architecture and working with the public. So this particular topic out of all of our equity series is one that I am involved with on a regular basis, and I'm really excited to share it with you, and I'm glad that we have such a great turnout tonight for the program. So let's get started. The National Equity Guides, as I had mentioned previously, are a 9-part series that were developed by National that each talk about a different sector of the industry. And this is our 8th presentation, so we only have one additional left. Some of our programs have been recorded since COVID has hit, and we will be posting all those things on our YouTube channel so that you can follow along. And the link to all of the equity guides will be provided at the end of the presentation, so you can actually print out those guides and use them as a reference for your own equitable advancement at your firm. The goal of the Equity and Architecture Committee is to open up this conversation of equity beyond its normal barriers. So of course we have many members who are very focused on equity on a regular basis, and we are excited to have a lot of those people here on our call, or on our webinar. But we also have a goal of keeping the dialogue open with people who may not realize the role that they are playing in perpetuating some circumstances that might be challenging for parts of our community. So it's important to, when we talk about equity, it's important to try to put yourself into the other party's shoes. If somebody else is feeling that they are being treated in a fashion that isn't fair and reasonable, then it's important for us to say, gee, why is that happening? And how can I help that situation? So you might not even be aware that that situation of inequity is occurring. So the goal of our committee is to keep the lines of communication open, try to reflect on multiple perspectives of the conversation, and come up with some strategies that everybody feels are reasonable, equitable, and fair. So I hope we reach our goal tonight, and let's dive right in. The Equity Guide to Engaging Community. So we're going to talk tonight about engaging community on a variety of different levels, but basically it's going beyond your conversation with just your one client or just the one party that you're engaging with. So thinking about, well, if I make this decision, what are the ramifications for the other people involved? And it could be as simple as, if I make my favorite thing for dinner, are the other 4 people at the table also going to feel like they were considered in my decision of what to make for dinner? So that's a really simple way to talk about how is your community engaged. So your community is everybody else who's affected by the choices and decisions you're making. And we're going to look at ways that we affect that as individuals, as firms, and as a profession. Community engagement is the essence, or the essence of community engagement is the inclusion of divergent voices, professionals, stakeholders, and end users to arrive at consensus about project goals and characteristics with a positive outcome for all. A broad body of research in multiple fields, including higher education, social science research, and public health, can help inform architecture professionals about the outcomes and methods of constructive community engagement. Architects in the community. Because of the type of work we do, almost everything we work on has some sort of an impact on the community. It could be the immediate neighborhood around the work site that we're working on, or it could be related to all the individuals who are going to occupy our project, or any random passerby who may encounter our project or building at any time, even if they're not generally a part of that community. Even when the client isn't required to consider the greater community, we as architects should be thinking about how are the neighbors affected, how is the neighborhood affected, how is the greater community affected by the decisions that I work with my client in making. So in the same way that we would make ethical decisions in our design recommendations to our client, while your client is your first priority, it is in the interest of society for us to be thinking about how the greater community is going to be affected in these decisions and try to assist and guide our client to make reasonable decisions that are going to benefit everybody. Architects usually are outsiders in the conversation, so very often the client and their community may have a relationship with each other already, and the architect may be unknown to the client and unknown to the community. So one of the important things we have to do when we're engaging our community is to build up a level of trust together with both parties. One way to do that is to communicate respectfully and with the goal of having understanding, and we will eventually reach success. So the roles of the architect in their community engagement are 5. We are learners, facilitators, mediators, advocates, and implementers. As I mentioned, the primary role is to the client, but it's important to have eyes and ears open to understand how the other parties are being affected by the decisions we're making, and being aware of conscious and subconscious responses by those clients, by the community participants. Simone, you have an example here?
So this is an example of a project I did in the Dominican Republic. I was working with an organization that's based out of the United States called Cambiando Vidas, which means changing lives. The intent was to travel to this area very close to the border of Haiti, where the communities have very deserving, needy families, and we help them build a house. We don't use our knowledge of an architect with our training from the United States. We build to their norms. So it's very difficult and challenging sometimes to not try to influence people the way you have been taught. It's more of a challenge for us to learn their building methods. So the slide at the left shows me working on the concrete block home with fellow participants of the community, other volunteers that come from different countries. It's an international nonprofit. And the slide on the right shows the finished product, which was at the end of 1 week. And the host family that we were building it for builds the house with you, as well as everyone in the community. So there's a sense of sweat equity, where everybody takes pride and respect for the final product. And I think if there's anything that I learned from it, it teaches you that, you know, we almost learn more from working with these people than what they learn from us. We really do learn more from them.
Thank you, Simone. Susan?
Yeah, so while I was chair of my local planning board, I interacted with the county planner and some state level, planning activities. And I was offered an opportunity to create a course at NJIT. And I had in my head that we really had to get involved in a community so the students could understand some of the implications of a larger scale site, which is obviously not just private property, but engaged with public activities. So the county connected us with Manville, and we were asked to help them because they had a trust problem between the developer, who inherited a site recently cleaned by EPA Superfund, and the stakeholders included the local business people, the neighborhood, and the elected officials. And so the students are there on the bridge, and that's a metaphor for bridging and building trust across the various stakeholders. You can see our model of a portion of the city on display in the Borough Hall, City Hall. At the bottom right, we actually did an unbelievable thing. We got the developer, elected officials, academics, students, and stakeholders all in one room in Newark to really work together. And we did this multiple times through a relatively compact semester. So that's one example I'm happy to share.
Thank you, Susan. Negative perceptions of proposals. It's very important that architects be fluent in engagement. We should not assume that we understand the problem and that we have solutions to offer without actually asking the stakeholders what they believe the problems are and what they understand the problems are, and then trying to actually solve the problems from their perspective and from the feedback that we've received. So sometimes from anecdotal experience, we think at first glance that we understand what the problems are. And there is nothing that shuts down community engagement more than being presented with a solution that doesn't hear what the community believes the problems are. So, and that is something, I don't think architects do it intentionally. It's probably something that grows out of good intentions or feeling like you're bringing your experience to the table. But it's very important to go through the process of engaging the community in the conversation, of understanding their perspective, their experience, their history, and being able to use that to generate your solution. There are 3 forms of community engagement that we're going to talk about tonight. The first is how individual architects can engage in their communities as informed and involved citizens. The second is how an architect can lead or facilitate engagement as a professional. And the third is how an architect can model engaged in equitable practices as they consider their impact on society. Engaging as citizens. So there's a variety of ways that we can engage as citizens. And this applies to students of architecture, people during their associate phases, as well as licensed architects, because it's taking what we know as creative problem solvers and as community builders and bringing those skills out into the community for the greater benefit. So some examples include volunteering for nonprofit and public organizations such as youth groups, public schools, social services, cultural institutions, and community planning. Appearing in public and being identified as an architectural professional, showing up at public events, running for public office, helping shape public policy, becoming activists at the local community level on neighborhood development issues such as traffic control or historic preservation. Rachel, did you want to share some of your experiences and help us understand what brought you to running for public office and your perspectives of architects in that capacity?
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. Earlier, I spoke a little about Dattner Architects, and I mentioned that Dattner is really a mission-driven firm. Our work focuses on civic spaces and the urban experience, primarily in New York City. And this really requires engaging and exchanging ideas with our clients, with public agencies, and with communities. Years ago, when I joined Dattner, it was one of Dattner's high-profile design projects that originally drew me to the firm. But really, it was this spirit of civic enrichment and engagement that called to me, and I remained and grew with the firm for years. My specialty is the design of affordable housing. I specialize in supportive and senior housing. And in my work, these are generally new 100 to 250 unit mid-rise or high-rise projects that are constructed in Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx. So you know, not a typology we see as much of in New Jersey, but it's really been my focus for my 16 years in practice. So last year, as an extension of my personal commitment to community engagement and a growing sense of political awareness, I ran for borough council here in Madison, which is in Morris County. And prior to that, I had served on the Madison Planning Board for several years. And the case that I made to voters and to residents as I campaigned and I knocked doors and I canvassed across town is that, you know, we have, architects are really a natural to run for local office. And what I learned is that when we as architects engage with local government, whether it's through elected office or appointment to boards and commissions, we can really show expertise and engagement with so many local issues that are really important to our communities. Just for a couple of examples, I found that through our experience with contracts and comparative analysis, we can really work to improve transparency in government and the budgeting process to help explain those complex ideas to residents who are not perhaps fluent in that kind of government process. We can certainly lead on climate and the environment by serving as champions for municipal climate action plans, working to advance community solar programs and support green and blue infrastructure. One of the roles I've taken on is to help advocate to plan for affordable housing for all residents, certainly a very hot topic in New Jersey, as we all know. We can make the case for calmer, safer streets that are walkable, bikeable, and equitable for people of all ages. We champion regional planning partnerships. Architects can help explain how planning can reduce congestion, and by guiding smart development in our towns and counties, we can improve the quality of life here in New Jersey. And, you know, we focus on infrastructure investment. This is to build resiliency and transportation equity. So these are areas of our expertise that are so germane to local government. So in Madison, I really built my campaign on those shared goals and values. And I showed how, as an architect and a member of the planning board, I was focused on land use, open space, circulation, and access. Personally, as a cyclist and the parent of a kindergartner who walked to school with his grandmother, I argued for making our streets safe for all who use them, which is a subject that cuts across, you know, all partisan politics. It's something that all members of a neighborhood can get behind. And as a climate activist, I ran to be a local leader who is focused on decarbonizing our economy to give us a fighting chance at what I describe as a really just and a peaceful future. And people are hungry to hear that. They want to hear a message about climate action from local leaders. So just, I guess I'll leave you with the thought that, and hopefully inspire you to get involved by talking about the ways that our profession trains us to be ready for this role as a citizen architect and a volunteer. Architects take the long view. We have this, you know, deep capacity for delayed gratification because our projects take years to design and finance and construct. And that really stands in contrast to a lot of local elected officials or even residents who are focused on the short term. And having that long view is so critical when you think about the planning and the investment that our communities really deserve. Architects are trained to plan and prepare for the future. In the practice of architecture, we make professional decisions that preemptively save lives. We promote health and increase well-being in the buildings where people live and work. And through design, we as architects are responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of the public in the built environment where people conduct all aspects of their lives. And architects, as a trusted profession, engender that level of confidence and trust. And I think people believe that architects will have an interest in enhancing and increasing safety and welfare and well-being. And in our everyday jobs, as we know, we work to bring together a group of really diverse collaborators who each have their own goals and priorities. Architects are natural consensus builders because of the way we work. And, you know, our job, whether it's in a volunteer position or elected office or in our day-to-day work, is to find common ground, to draw it up as plans, you know, whether figuratively or literally, and turn that shared vision for community into reality. And that message really resonated with voters. And I won my race. I unseated a two-term incumbent who had served for many years on the council. And I was sworn in January by Governor Murphy, and now I'm in the first year of my 3-year term as a first-term councilwoman. And I'm learning a lot as I go, but I found that for all the reasons I mentioned, people are eager to, you know, hear my perspective, be it more of a technical one or a communication one where I can help to explain complex issues and break things down into simple terms. And it's been really gratifying, both in the process of running for office when I campaigned and met with so many residents, and then collaborating with all different kinds of people across different departments in our local government. So it's, I guess, a bit of a stump speech to all of you to encourage you to consider running and how you can volunteer to get engaged. So I think I'm happy to take questions about this, or as we continue the presentation, I'll sort of interject and mention examples that are germane to the topics that Stacy's addressing.
Thank you, Rachel. We don't have any questions yet, so I'm going to continue on, and as things come up, we'll address those. Excellent. Slide's not advancing. Let's see. Here we go. Simone.
So this is, these photos were taken of when I was on the council. So Rachel, you have a lot to look forward to, and God willing, Susan, you will as well. Engaging with the community is something that you can do a little bit more easily when you are at a public official, such as a councilwoman or a member of an organization. So, but even if you're a citizen architect, and you keep a public calendar, know when events are happening, know when your parades are, show an interest, be respectful of those who have fought for our country, and they're really our greatest and most respected citizens of all, members of our VFW, and our vets, our police officers. That's me in the lower right picture with a couple of them, our EMTs. Just know what's going on in your community, and be out there supporting them, whether it's local schools that are doing some sort of an event, or officials that are having a parade, such as these photos of me on Memorial Day. It's extremely rewarding, and people will get to know you, and they'll understand that you're very sincere in your service to them.
Thank you, Simone. I wanted to also mention that although we might not always see it when we're in fee negotiation with our clients, architects are known for being one of the more trusted professions. So when the general population has been surveyed, trust in architects is one of the higher levels that we see. So when architects join public committees and got involved in community engagement in a volunteer citizen architect format, usually the population is very happy to have an architect involved. They consider architects to be someone knowledgeable, someone reliable, someone trustworthy. So if you do find yourself getting involved in a citizen architect community opportunity, chances are the people that you're working with are going to look up to you and be grateful for your service. So I have always found it very rewarding, and I imagine the other women on the panel have as well, which is why they continue to serve their communities. So we encourage it. Okay, Susan.
Yeah, so this slide is really representing getting out into the public realm, public space, one way or another as an architect, whether it be a panelist or presenter for, on the top left, what was a New Jersey Future forum, a redevelopment forum, where you are with a broad spectrum of the larger New Jersey community, which is really exciting. Or on the right, where in order to advocate for and to nurture excitement and support for our historic district and historic ordinances, we celebrated the anniversary with some preservation awards. And that was a fantastic, gathering opportunity, but the program had more credibility when an architect obviously was involved in that effort. And then on the bottom, after a lot of activism and starting a grassroots nonprofit organization to promote responsible growth in the community, we ended up having to actually file a lawsuit against a national home builder at one point because of the way that this project was encroaching on the community and also creating environmental injustices. So on the bottom, we actually produced a bunch of documents and handed them off to the library as a part of their archive, and documented a number of gatherings and events that promoted equity in the community. Thank you.
Oh, let's see. Steve Lazarus raised his hand. Lisa, do you know how to see what Steve would like to say?
Wait a second. I'll let him talk.
Sure.
Okay, Steve, you're on. You have to unmute yourself, though. There you go.
Yeah, my apologies. I accidentally hit it.
Oh.
Sorry.
Steve is the president of AIA New Jersey, so when I saw his hand go up, I thought it was important that we let him engage. But all right, Steve.
No, it was
Thanks.
important. He was just checking to make sure we knew what we were doing. That's all.
Okay, excellent. All right.
There you go.
So our next slide up is increasing public awareness and interest in architecture. So this is an area of engagement that every one of us probably is already involved with in some capacity. But we wanted to share some organized ways that everybody can get involved and tell you a little bit about some opportunities that are coming up. So one is a typical career day presentation. Your child might come home and say, oh, in the month of February, we'd like everybody's parent to come into school one day and talk for a few minutes on what you do for a living. Or there are larger career day presentations that may be for high school kids as they're preparing to apply to colleges. The second is community lectures at a school or a library. Sometimes you might be invited to make a presentation to the women's club on a historical building in your town, or something at the library about town history or sustainability or some other community topic that you may be knowledgeable about as an architect. architecture in schools, K through 12 education. So AIA New Jersey, almost on a monthly basis, is doing some sort of K through 12 education project. Today, we were guest speakers to the New Jersey School Board Association on Facebook Live, and we talked about our all-girls design tower challenge that we held last February. We talked about the upcoming architect story time. So we have a dozen architects who are each going to be reading an elementary level book on video for children about what inspired them to become an architect, or a story about their favorite architecture. And that will be on our AIA New Jersey YouTube channel and going out through the New Jersey Library Network and the School Board Association contact list. Another is the New Jersey School Board Association STEAM Tank, which is a science, math, architecture, technology competition that occurs every year. It's for K through 12. And Simone and I have both participated with the STEAM Tank, but it's a series of competitions. They do a preliminary round that is a virtual submission. Then they do the regional competition in March. And then after each submission level, the students work further on their project. So the initial one is their brainstorming idea. Then they put together a prototype and start to develop the concept further. And then the final presentation, they actually have to have a full working model and basically a business plan for rolling that out. And it functions kind of like the Shark Tank TV show. So the architects and other professionals work as the jurors, and we also serve as mentors for some of the competitors. And there's always room for more architects to get involved in that. The ACE Mentor program is a group of architects, engineers, and people in the construction industry who team up with high school students to help guide them during high school to understand the building industry and to get more involved, and kind of lead them up through developing a portfolio, shadowing in a firm, and then getting ready to apply to college or to start working in the industry. The NOMA Project Pipeline is a summer program developed by NOMA that helps students and members of compromised communities who may not be as familiar with architecture and opportunities that are available in the building industry career-wise, to help them to get involved with the industry so they can pursue a career in architecture. And Construction, which is a competition that AIA Newark and Suburban participates in each year. Construction is a national organization, but our West Jersey and Newark and Suburban each have a Construction competition each year. So a group of architects come together and build a model based on whatever the theme of the competition is out of pantry items. And then all the pantry items that were part of the model are donated to a local food bank. So that's another way to get involved. And there are many, many, many more. These are just some examples that we're providing. Simone, can you talk about our Tower Challenge competition?
Sure. So, so this, I have to thank Stacy and Joe David for inviting me to participate in this event. It actually was held at Tenafly High School, was the host, and you see me there with our president, Steve Lazarus, and we are judging the work of this particular team. The teams were comprised of high school girls, so their ages ran from 9 to 12, but they were all interested. They were from, the science in that type of field, but most of them had never even used an architect scale, but they were curious. They wanted to learn. So by providing this program for them, they were also introduced to concepts of zoning, efficiency. The taller the tower, the more lucrative the financial, rental value of the higher spaced floors would be. However, that would have a cost at design efficiency and, structural challenges. So they were taught to really look at the issues we face as architects, the challenges we face, budget, time, money, as well as beauty and aesthetics and into creating their designs, which they built, as you see, out of spaghetti and marshmallows. And one of the best part about the designs was that they would have to undergo a seismic test where they would be put on this table that, you know, everybody would shake and see how long it took the structure to withstand the seismic force. And I think everybody really came away with that day learning a little bit more about what architects do and how architecture really is integrated into the community, how what we do, the built form, affects the entire environment and the way people live and react to it. So it was a great day and very rewarding. And I recommend everybody, when they have an opportunity, to volunteer. And you know, you'll learn a lot from these young ladies. And I think we taught them a lot as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Simone. Susan.
Okay, so one thing that I've learned in community activism and bringing architectural issues into the community is that you can't just complain, you can't just, you know, fight. You have to learn, as you've already pointed out, and you need sometimes to teach the way you do need to teach your clients sometimes about the process. But also what we've tried to do with our grassroots group is support the arts and local artists while celebrating the architecture and the history and historic preservation of the community. And so when you're engaged this way, sometimes amazing things happen. Like in this display case, we were given a chance to provide a curatorial exhibit in the public library. And because I was involved with this, somebody at the Jersey Shore, who I know, found a whole archive in their attic that was related to a citizen of our village back in the 19th century. And so it's pretty cool how you stumble. The more you get involved, you know, the more interesting it gets. But in the end, it needs to be community building, not breaking down or creating roadblocks. It needs to be lifting up and positive, despite the fact that sometimes you have to go to battle or have a fight. So that's the point of this slide. Thanks.
Thanks. Architects as activists. So there are opportunities for us to get involved as individuals or as firms to speak on behalf of some of the arenas that are usually nonpartisan and are really about protecting humanity. So those things might be related to climate change or housing, and, you know, coming up with solutions and recommendations that we understand from our industry and that we can maybe speak to with some more viable solutions than other people in the community who may equally be as concerned, but maybe don't necessarily have ideas of what solutions can be. So some ways that we can get involved are participating in AIA Grassroots. Grassroots is a once-a-year national convention. We alternate years actually going to Capitol Hill and speaking to our legislators on a subject matter that is developed by AIA as the platforms that we're going to be speaking to. And then on the opposite years, we are encouraged to have local conversations with our elected officials or go to our state capitol and have these conversations in our local regions. Political or civic engagement campaigns. So there are certainly always topics that are being discussed in our communities, and it's important for architects, because of the skill set that we bring, how can we get involved and help to facilitate conversation and for people to reach consensus. So as we are all well aware, if we have divergent opinions, the only way to take a step forward is to find common ground that we can agree upon and move forward. So the longer that we lock horns, and when we have people participating who are not great at community engagement and not great at facilitating compromise, it can be impossible to make any headway. We could just find ourselves at a constant stalemate because everybody is holding their line. So one of the big ways that architects can be beneficial in the process is to get involved with our community and help to facilitate those conversations, get each party to the table and find places where there is crossover so that we can move forward on an agenda that's healthy for the community. And conducting pro bono work is another way for architects to get involved as activists. Rachel, did you want to talk to anything specific about these related to your experience or practice?
Well, you know, for a second, I thought maybe in contrast to some of the great photos that my colleagues here shared, I could show a picture of me carrying a sign in the climate strike last year, because that's another way that we lend, you know, our minds and our bodies to the effort, right? Showing up sometimes is the most important thing. And part of why that's so important is because when some of these issues that we organize around start to feel overwhelming, you know, this is just speaking as an activist, showing up and surrounding yourself with like-minded people is really energizing. And sometimes you got to kind of go back to the well and leaving aside the architect, just be a citizen, you know, and surround yourself with people who are passionate about the same issues, whether that means, you know, volunteering with a local community facility and, you know, doing that kind of hands-on work, or being shoulder to shoulder with someone in the street and marching and using your voice and your platform to advocate. So I guess that's a little bit less about the architect's role and more about the citizen's role as an activist. But I feel like they inform each other. And using my voice about the issues that I care about has given me the confidence to be an advocate at my own firm, where I can speak to the partners and the principals about how we as architects, for instance, should be activists on climate when we talk to our clients, and help them understand that the risk of climate disaster is a threat to all of us, including them and their investments. And having that kind of, you know, passionate engagement that you display in a professional setting with your colleagues and you know, the people who own and run the firm sends a strong message that we as architects need to be passionate about the future that we're facing together as designers and as citizens. So I think this idea of activism runs through all of these levels of engagement, whether it's in our day-to-day work, speaking with clients, speaking with our neighbors, running for office, or like I said, just showing up and being a supporter.
Rachel, can you also share with our audience that wonderful circumstance that you had in your community where we do have a lot of people that are concerned about climate change and think about it as a giant problem at the ozone layer level and can't necessarily think about how they can make a step to improve climate change, but you were able to come up with something very local that's maybe unique to your community, but has empowered your community to make a mark towards improving climate change.
Sure. Madison is really unique. It's one of only 9 municipalities in New Jersey that has its own electric utility. And this utility was created more than 100 years ago by the town's first mayor, who had the foresight to say that we want to electrify our town. This is back in like 1889, and we're going to do it on our own. And so because our borough purchases electricity sort of in bulk or wholesale from JCP&L and then sells it through our own local grid that is owned and operated by Madison. We have a public utility. The revenue from that utility is reinvested in our town rather than going to, shareholders of, private utilities. We use that money to do everything from, hire more crossing guards to pave our streets. And this year, because I think in part I had made my focus and my interests as a councilwoman known to our borough administration, the proposal was made by our chief financial officer to take $200,000 from our surplus from this municipal, the utility revenue, and earmark it for a energy transformation project, whether that was creating community solar, investing in more electric vehicle charging stations, or even just creating local benefit to people who right now you can get a $25 rebate, I guess, if you buy an energy efficient appliance. Madison, on the flip side, can't participate in that because we're not part of one of the large utilities that offer this rebate, but we could create a local version of that. So this is an example that is fairly specialized to Madison, but I was able as a candidate to go and talk to residents and say, we can take action. We could buy more renewable energy and decide that we as a borough don't want to purchase any more fossil fuel energy to distribute and make all of our businesses and customers in town green. But I made maybe a more broad example of how any town could engage on climate is to follow the example of Princeton, who created a really incredible climate action plan. Princeton is unique in that they have the resources of the university and the a really engaged local community that can draw, on a lot of expertise. But they went through this creation and education process of creating a municipal or a local climate action plan that will guide their decisions in the form of like a master plan would. And that's something that any town can do. And it's something that Madison is going to look into doing first as part of the master plan project that we're working on now, but then we're going to split it off and hopefully create our own climate plan. It's a little technical and I have some suggestions about how we might do that. I won't maybe get into this, but I'm happy to share my contact information and give pointers to anyone that would like to learn more about how you can get some momentum started around that in your town.
Thank you, Rachel.
Just to add to that, many communities in New Jersey now are members of Sustainable New Jersey, and most of them have green teams, and any citizen can volunteer to serve on those, and that's a really great way to actually make some things happen.
Great point, Susan.
Thank you. Simone.
So these slides, or actually these photos, were taken in on a trip to South Africa. I had the opportunity to travel there. I was working on a paper while I was in law school on housing in South Africa. They have a unique constitution in the sense that housing is written in black and white as a human right, which it's maybe understood in America as such, but it's not formally written as such anywhere in our constitution. One benefit of having a newly formed country is that you can learn from other countries as to how to adapt, the writings in your documents. The issue, however, is what is written is not always what's done. As you all know, South Africa went through apartheid when architects actually delineated the land and segregated the people. You had the white towns and the black townships, and there was a great spatial divide that we now need to understand whether or not, with the fall of apartheism, if this spatial transformation has yet happened. The only way to do that really is to engage with activist groups there in the countries that you're studying, and find out through the local community activists if there's a way you can help. So the top slide is at the University of Cape Town, and it's actually with the law students there. As an architect and engaging with law, you're dealing with public policy and able to really help, you know, the attorneys understand the value of housing in relation to people's outlook and mental health. And I'm sure Rachel could probably talk more to that extent because she's involved with it actually at her firm. The lower slide is with the Legal Aid Society, who are really dealing with basic human rights, you know, the right to life and HIV testing and housing as well as equity issues. But it's basically, I went there more so as a citizen, not as an architect, trying to engage with the people in order to support a paper that I was doing on whether or not you know, the spatial transformation in South Africa has really happened, even though housing is a constitutional right.
Thank you, Simone. Simone, this is also your slide.
So this is also my slide, and actually this shows us engaging with members of the Constitutional Court. To the lower left is Justice Cameron, who is now retired from the South African Constitutional Court. That's the highest court, that's like our Supreme Court. And to the right in the center is Justice Moseneke, who also has retired from the Constitutional Court. But the end result of our meetings and our discussions, as you see, they're very open to discussions. They're Supreme Court justices, as you know, in U.S. terms, and they even said, you know, it doesn't come from the court. It comes from activism. It comes from grassroots, you know, uprisings, so that you can empower the people. They'll do it. They're there, but they need our help, our support to help them mobilize and have the courage that they need in order to really let them know that they're empowered and they can actually assist in the transformation of their own lives.
Thank you, Simone. Members of AIA New Jersey and architects, architects who aren't members of AIA New Jersey, can join the New Jersey Architects Political Action Committee. That is an organization of architects who meet on usually a monthly basis, sometimes every other month, to talk about issues that are important to architects and important to the community that architects have an impact on. And we have the opportunity to raise money for legislators that support the ideals that are priorities to our organization. We also support candidate architects, such as Simone right now in running for her campaign has recently been endorsed by the New Jersey Architects Political Action Committee. And we are currently looking at Susan's application, and Brian Penshow is another member of AIA New Jersey who is running for office, and he also has the endorsement of the New Jersey Architects Political Action Committee. But anyone is welcome to join. And you can reach out to me personally if you'd like to get added to that mailing list. But as a member of AIA New Jersey, when you pay your dues each year, unless you opt out, a portion of your dues goes towards that contribution. And we are one of the least powerful political action committees in New Jersey because other industries make it a much higher priority, such as the realtors and the builders. They have much more lavishly filled coffers to support their initiatives. So it is something that we encourage our members to get involved in. The AIA Legislative and Government Affairs Committee also meets on a monthly basis to discuss new legislation that's coming forward, to see if we want to take action on it. We've had architects speak on Capitol Hill for or against different issues that the committee has determined are in the best interest of the community. Sometimes it's in the best interest of the profession, but often there are issues that are community affected issues, whether it's related to historic preservation or a myriad of topics of relevance. But that's another great way that our general membership can get involved with having these conversations. Engaging as professionals. Facilitating community participation and voice to ensure that members and end users have input and that their knowledge, assets, values, history, cultures, needs, and priorities are reflected in the result. So one of the important things to remember when we're engaging with the community as professionals is that the general population don't usually have an opportunity to engage on an architecture project. So although we might all live in buildings that were designed by an architect, we don't necessarily meet every day with the general population. So there may be a certain level of intimidation or a lack of comfort on the general public to speak up when they have an issue, because they might not always feel that they know the vocabulary or that they understand what is being presented to them. So it's important for us as professionals to understand who our audience is and to make the subject matter available to them, whether it's in written communication, whether it's a graphic communication, whether it's small group conversations, or whether it's a town hall type of presentation. It's important to make sure that a true cross-section is being represented in the community that you're talking to. So of course, if you hold your community conversations during the week at 10 o'clock in the morning, you are probably not going to be able to talk to members of the community who are teachers, or members of the community who are stay-at-home moms with young children, or members of the community who are working at lower paying hourly wage type jobs. So when you're thinking about how am I going to engage with the community, you want to make sure that you identify who the stakeholders are and come up with community engagement tools that will allow you to reach all of those people. It's very common that people who have community influence or people who are very vocal are going to have their voices heard, but it's important for you as the one trying to make the proper community engagement to make sure full representation is being included in the conversation. So sometimes you'll have to have meetings on weekends or in the evening or at a variety of different times. You may have to do phone surveys or online surveys for people who can't actually come out to meetings. You might have to come up with presentation techniques that you wouldn't normally use. So if you're used to working with developers who look at plans all the time, they may be very familiar with what you're presenting, but the general community population might not understand what they're looking at if you present blueprints at a community gathering. So you have to think about what tools and tactics and communication methods do I need to use to be able to clearly convey the message of this project, and how do I gather back the communication from the audience. So everyone might not be comfortable going up to the microphone and giving remarks. So you may have to come up with other ways for people to communicate. Maybe they can communicate through writing in a message or participating in a survey where you demonstrate the variety of options available in the survey for people to choose from, because they might not even know, they might know they don't like what you're proposing, but they might not know what the other choices are. So as a professional engaging, it's important to communicate on the level of your audience, make sure everyone in the audience understands what you're saying, and make sure that you have properly taken the time to gather back the feedback from that community. Sometimes architects are participating as a neutral facilitator, and sometimes architects are participating to advocate for a particular standpoint. It's important to make clear when you first engage with your community what role you're playing, so people don't feel like you are already advocating for a particular standpoint, but pretending to be a neutral facilitator. So the more transparent that you can be in presenting yourself and the project, the greater trust you will have built between yourself and the public. Susan.
Yeah, thank you. On that comment about facilitating, because of the grassroots organization that I co-founded, one thing we found to be very helpful when we organized the public was to actually stand up and diagram things that people were saying. And that's something we're really good at as architects. So we not only took notes up on large scale poster board to document the meeting, but graphically interpreted some of it for the public, which was really interesting, not unlike what you do when you teach in architecture school, but very helpful in a live scenario. But here what you see are three very different kinds of graphics. So the top right, an architect would recognize that as maybe a kind of a NOLI plan, because, you know, we learned about those in school, but it's basically a footprint of a community clearly showing the type of the pattern of the built environment. And it's very simple and it's very useful to contextualize a conversation or a project. The middle one, I actually did pro bono. I did a trail map, very simple trail map for a school campus. That school had also hired me to design an outdoor classroom for their sustainability curriculum and their outdoor garden, which right now I'm sure is a very popular place to be, since we all have to learn, you know, outdoors more than indoors. But this is just a way to sort of create a graphic discovery for a community where the walking path is more important than the roadways and the asphalt, for example. And on the top left, this is just for the public and as a way to kind of three-dimensionally pop a historic district out of a flat 2D perimeter of a municipal boundary, and create not only like a logo, if you will, but a simple way of saying that a historic district is a lot more than what you see on a flat map, and we're all living in it, so it's a living, breathing thing. Thanks for sharing these.
Sure. This is yours, Susan.
Yeah, this was one of the Garden State studios that I taught at NJIT. It had a grant from this Sea Grant program, which is a federal program that partners with public institutions, universities. This was all about resilient design. And what's really interesting about this is Greenwich down on the Delaware Bay. It's a small town that's in a good and a bad way kind of forgotten. It has a shrinking population. It has beautiful environmental marshland and hummocks, and, you know, a village and a crazy interesting history. It was a part of the Underground Railroad, and they had a tea party there during the colonial era. They actually confiscated British tea. So there's a lot to learn here. What was interesting is it's a predominantly white community. My students were very diverse and from the more urban areas in New Jersey. I think we only had one student from South Jersey. And it was almost the reverse experience of what these AIA guides assume, which is the white professional goes into a community of color, right? And we have to be extremely thoughtful about that. So this was just, it was really eye-opening for me. The student who ended up latching on to becoming the studio historian, the one who learned the most about the history, was an immigrant from Haiti, a wonderful young man. And you see him here. He's next to probably one of the older community members. This is a guy who still lives off the land. I mean, how many people do you know that catch eels in the marsh and sell them and sustain themselves that way? His last name is also the name of the colonial era landing that founded the town. So here we had, you know, a lot of new, youthful, recent immigrant, you know, student engagement with 10th generation folks that needed our help to create some master plans, not only to protect the town from sea level rise, which was the primary purpose, but to look at the possibility of giving them an economic boost with like ecotourism. And so our projects ended up being all about hospitality, which interestingly enough is what we received from the community when we went there multiple times. Thank you.
Engaging as a firm. Some examples of how a firm can be engaged in communities are include for-profit firms that include community engagement work in their business model, deliver pro bono projects or create nonprofit arms, nonprofit firms dedicated to community-related projects, university-based design centers that connect students and practitioners to community networks and needs, firms that prioritize social justice and amplify voices that have historically been excluded from decisions affecting their environment. One example I want to give from this is the AIAS Butterflies program, where universities help connect architecture students with people who need accessible access to their current homes. And the AIAS team will put together a project where they come and install a ramp or make other universal design accommodations to assist that person in being able to better utilize the housing that they already have. And that's just one example that falls into this, but there are lots of ways for firms to be engaged on a greater level, and sometimes that percolates up through the firm from an employee such as Rachel, encouraging her principals to get more involved in ways that they can engage their community and be activists. And sometimes it is part of the mission of the firm to begin with. So it can be bottom up or top down, but in many ways it helps that firm to be a better neighbor to their community when they are working with their immediate neighbors. Or their greater community, where they are helping to establish themselves as a resource for their community in areas that the community sees a problem but may not always be able to communicate what the issue is or generate solutions. So the firm can act as a sounding board and a conduit to help those people to communicate and get their issues brought up to people who can actually resolve the problem. Doing pro bono work. Simone?
So this is an example of my participation on Wheels for Heroes. We didn't get to do it this past 9/11 due to the COVID restrictions, but last year we did. It's a way of giving back to the people that really put their lives on the front line for us, our essential workers that are, you know, our EMS, our police, our firemen, our vets, have all made sacrifices for us. And sometimes their families' legal affairs are not in order if, God forbid, something should happen to them. So you engage with your practitioners. In this case, it was my fellow lawyers. And we took a day and drafted their wills and powers of attorneys and healthcare directives so that they would be better prepared if, you know, something should happen to them.
Thank you, Simone. Susan?
Yeah, this is another Garden State studio. I was teaching one in the Camden area when Storm Sandy hit, and it just seemed like we really had to respond very quickly to Storm Sandy and to help a community. In this case, it's a barrier island on the Jersey Shore, in the vicinity of the the epicenter where the storm hit. We needed to respond quickly, and academia is in a unique place where you can put together, you know, I could put together a syllabus in a studio and choose a site and really plunge into helping the community visualize a future, even though they were consumed with the emergency management and very serious short-term recovery activities. So the students were introduced at a council meeting, which of course wasn't in the municipal building, which was destroyed. So our project ended up being the design of a municipal building. And it also had a very ambitious agenda, which was to restore this site, which was largely paved and adjacent to tidal waters. These are some examples of how the world was flipped upside down, you know, boats on land and land, you know, out at sea. The classic pile of debris with the iconic water tower, and the students gathered in front of the iconic clock tower in the center of town on their site. And this studio actually morphed into or spun off a series of lectures that we gave through NJIT, the Center for Resilient Design, to a gathering of mayors, to New Jersey, Preservation New Jersey, to a local citizens group that wanted to have an environmentalist and an architect both speak. So this is one example in times of crisis, how even though your firm may not yet be hired by a community because they don't know what they need yet, people, those of us with planning experience and access to the academy, can really jump in and help visualize something for the future.
Thank you. Design methodologies for engagement. Socially responsive design, community co-creation, human-centered design, design charrettes with the community, exceeding requirements to accommodate the needs of the true population, for example, using universal design over accessible design, LEED applications, and the Living Building Challenge. So these are some examples of ways that architects and firms can, and even the profession on a larger scale beyond the firm, can start to come up with solutions that make sure that the community who is being impacted by the project is fully engaged with what the design solutions are. And again, sometimes that audience can't even communicate to you what the problems are. So a person, let's say a mom with a stroller or a person with a wheelchair. So those are two different end users that may be inhibited from using a space that has a staircase as a barrier. Those are two different populations who speak two different languages and may not necessarily know what opportunities are available to them to solve the problem, other than saying, I can't get into this building because I have wheels. So it's up to us to come up with a design methodology so we can start to look at who is our audience, who is the community, when does the community engage with my project, on what levels do they need to engage, and how do I facilitate the conversation to understand what their needs are? How do I adjust the conversation and the vocabulary so that those people can be a part of the solution? So a client might say, well, I can't imagine we would have a design charrette with 100 people from the community in the room. How could we ever possibly make any headway? But it's up to the architect to come up with some tools to be able to facilitate that. So how do we break down the design process in such a way that the community can be co-creators, that the end users are able to take a look at what's being proposed and see how it's going to impact what their experience is in their neighborhood, and how do we engage them. And then coming up with solutions that, you know, I remember when LEED first came to the table, there was a constant battle or a cry that we heard from architects over and over again. Well, every time I bring up sustainable design to my client, they say, oh, it's too expensive. I don't want to be involved in that anymore. So it takes an architect to educate themselves on materials and methods to come up with solutions that respond to universal design, that respond to sustainable design, that respond to human-centered design, to make those a regular part of your everyday practice instead of here's my conventional practice versus here's my specialty practice that accommodates whatever this specialty priority that we're going to talk about. But how can we instead integrate sustainability into all of our projects? How can we integrate universal solutions that don't seem like duck solutions, but they instead become a normal solution that benefits the whole community? So how do we start to make that transition from conventional design being a design that imposes barriers and specialty design being design that accommodates to having all of your language be a language of accommodation and sustainable practice and being more thoughtful to our communities. So when your client comes and talks to you about what their problem is, you have some options of what you can present to them. Once you start to integrate these design methodologies into your day-to-day practice, they no longer become something that you have to sell as an option, but there's something that you are versed well enough that you can integrate them into all of your designs and they become a normal part of our community. Creating common spaces and friendly environments by fostering human health and comfort and environmental regeneration. I want to give each of our panelists an opportunity to make some closing remarks. We'll start with Susan.
Thank you so much. I just want to reiterate how blessed, I feel as though my life and practice as a professional has been with all the various kinds of community engagement that I've been able to participate in. You have to show up, sometimes you have to say yes, and sometimes you have to kind of get into something without knowing exactly where it's going to lead. But I wanted to, besides the kind of rosy, satisfying, gratifying side to all of this, I just wanted to point out a couple of challenges that I think are inherent in this topic. One is sometimes it's very hard to identify the stakeholders. It's very hard sometimes to find them all or define who they are. And so that's a very important part of this kind of engagement, to get a grip on who the stakeholders actually are and find the ones that are hard to find. The second is time. There's often a conflict between the length of a project and the rapidly changing stakeholders. And as was mentioned by, I believe it was maybe Simone earlier, architects are willing to delay gratification. We have a long range, view. We're good at visualizing, envisioning things. But, elected officials come and go, and citizens and people are very transient, and there's a lot of change. So time is a challenge. Power, I believe, is a challenge. Community engagement is not possible without support. And I think architects have a lot less power in these settings than maybe some people think. I think in architecture schools, we don't teach enough the things that actually affect and influence design, like finance, law, public policy, etc. And so in the end, we don't want to be arrogant. We don't want to act as though we're powerful, but in the end, we have to admit we really don't have a lot of power to begin with. So sharing it can be challenging. In education, I already mentioned this, we should be training the students more about the things that also influence design besides the architect. And that will make them better activists and better at community engagement down the road. Finally, value. I have found that the value of time versus materials, like in pro bono work, will often, nonprofits and people seeking pro bono work will often want the architect's time free pro bono, but they tend to find the money to buy the materials, you know, to build the thing. And I think that maybe an architect's time is devalued somehow, and that we have to be careful about pro bono work, which can be very important and very effective. But I really think that nonprofits should be willing to fund some design time as well as funding their materials. So it's the value we bring to the table, which I think is very high, which Stacy mentioned at the beginning, the value of our profession to society, and how do we do all of this work while preserving that value. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Simone?
So first, I just want to give the credit to Rachel, because it was Rachel Susan that made this statement. But I think one thing, you know, that Susan had mentioned that we should say at the end, and I think it's on key, is the challenges that we face with equitable community engagement. And I think if you're a really caring advocate, and I actually think Rachel has exemplified a lot of it in her run for campaign, and I commend you for everything you've done at such an early stage in your civic career. I know you were on the planning board before then, but all the best now with your term in council. Is that we can't forget that although we think people need us, we need them more than they need us. I mean, we need them to help us tease out, you know, context-specific items that are factors that are necessary to empower them, so that our community can speak for themselves. They can understand basically that they're in charge of their lives, and by doing so, they're dignified, and they trust us to be their advisor, their trusted advisor, and that way the community themselves can go out and inspire and influence other movements. So I think the hardest part to really remember is not to keep thinking these people need us. We need them too.
Thanks, Simone. Rachel?
I guess on the theme of challenges, I guess I'm tempted to relate the story of last night. I was on a Zoom meeting last night for a Community Board 7 in the Bronx, where we presented a new affordable housing project that was to be developed on the site of a landmarked church in partnership with the church. And you know, while community members took turns getting up to complain about the project, there was, of course, like a busy email going in the background between our team members, including the historic preservation consultant who emailed us a picture of a project for the very same site that had been approved by the Land Use Committee 4 years ago. It was much taller, much less sensitive to the historic structure on site. And by comparison, the project we were proposing last night was much more complimentary and deferential to the historic structure, much shorter, you know, less overwhelming. And to me, it really highlighted how there is, I'm afraid, a growing force of, you know, activism is good. People should be involved in their communities, but in a lot of ways, our local, you know, community boards and residents have found more of a voice and seized the opportunity to, I don't know, really ramp up the kind of NIMBYism that we kind of expect to some extent when we propose new projects, because lots of people, for many people, no development is desirable. And there's this kind of, in the last couple of years, people are more engaged politically and using their voices, finding their voices. But I think we as architects have a really significant challenge ahead of us to combat what has been a kind of a backlash or a negative activism that is coming to the forefront in a lot of these meetings. And sometimes you just have to be a punching bag and take your lumps. And, we've all, I think, those of us on the planning board have been on both sides of that. So, I have sympathy for whether you're, reviewing and approving the project or you're presenting the project. They're not easy. And community engagement can sometimes take the form of, it can be a bit of a brawl. The other challenge is that it's tempting as professionals to seek community engagement or say that we've achieved community engagement and just kind of check the box and say, well, we went to the community board and we presented it and we fulfilled our regulatory obligation to do so. And, therefore the community engagement has been, discharged for this project. Or similarly, when we talk about climate action, we say, well, we met the building code, which, is as aggressive as this client wants to be. They're not interested in pushing the envelope. And so we kind of comfort ourselves that we've met the requirements. And it's really challenging, among all the other things that we need to do as professionals and human beings, to carve out energy and focus to go beyond checking the box. So that's kind of what I was talking about when I mentioned, trying to rally my colleagues and the principals at my firm to take it further, because of course, we need to meet the needs and the priorities of our clients, and we are respectful of those needs and priorities. But I think, we're at an inflection point in so many ways in our country. Climate is a big one for me. That I think we need to find a little bit of that spirit of activism and personal commitment to take it beyond checking the box and see what we can do as individuals, as professionals, as firm leaders, to dig a little deeper and find a truer meaning or spirit of a community engagement that goes beyond, meeting the basic requirements of our profession. So it's a tall order, but I hope that everyone that's joined us tonight has a little appetite for that, because you're here, which is a good start. And I'm so glad to have been able to share some of my passion and some of the steps that I've taken to deepen the sense and practice of community engagement for myself.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.
And I just want to close by reminding everybody who's participating tonight that your voice is also very important to us. I don't see any questions for us in the Q&A box, but you are welcome to contact us through AIA New Jersey, and we have so many ways to communicate, through our Facebook page, through our Instagram, through our blog. You are going to be receiving a link to this slideshow and eventually the recorded presentation on a whole. And we encourage you to get involved in any of the committees that we mentioned tonight, any of the activities that we mentioned tonight. If you have other committees or activities that you would like to recommend, New Jersey is always looking to champion new opportunities, so please bring those to the forefront. And we challenge every one of you to get more involved in your community, in whatever level you are comfortable, and eventually in some levels that you may not currently be comfortable. So start to be the voice of change in your community that is looking to make things better for people who may not know how to make it better for themselves. So thank you all for participating. We have one more program coming up in this it is going to be on October 21st, and it talks about measuring our progress, so we can take a look at what firms can do to see if they are moving the mark towards a more equitable future. And we are concurrently running an equity series, taking a look at the architectural profession from the African American perspective. And that is a 6-part series, of which we have 2 more sessions left. And those are running every other Thursday night, with the next one being next week on Thursday, September 24th. That's another opportunity for a free member benefit webinar and continuing education. And we encourage you to participate during this year of COVID, where we have had to change up so many things that we're doing here for you from AIA New Jersey. We're proud that we've been able to provide this format and delighted to have such a robust population participating, and we hope you will continue to do so. So thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panelists, and we will sign off. Oh, wait a minute. We have a question. Lisa, do you know how to answer Michael Bangus's or identify Michael Bangus's question?
I don't see a question.
Oh, okay. Maybe it was another false alarm. All right. Well,
Sorry.
then we will say good night to everyone, and thank you very much.
Wait, hold on just a second. Let me
Oh,
allow
now
him
you
to
see it?
talk. Now I
Okay.
do. Michael, you'll have to unmute yourself. I'm sorry, I cannot do
Here I
that.
go.
There you go.
Yeah, I want to say when I got my license in the mid-'70s, it was a couple of years, just very soon after I got on the planning board in my town, Hopatcong. And I don't need to talk about that, but what I want to say is I was very impressed and excited at seeing what you younger architects have done with your credentials as architects. And it makes me feel like I should have done more when I was younger. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, so nice.
Michael,
Michael.
you still have time.
It was great. It was great listening to this. Thank you.
Thank you for participating, Michael. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Thanks for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.